Welcome to Chatsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to season 2 of Chatsunami. I'm Satsunami and joining me today for this, quite frankly, glorious episode is my very good friend Adam. Welcome back for another season.
Morning, Angle. Hello. It's good to be back in the studio, ready to go.
Yeah, I was just going to say before we started, you might want to go home and change because, you know, you've got a bit of red on you.
Oh, good one.
And as you can tell by those very subtle references, I was going to say, can you tell, like, you know, we're referencing the first two films and not the third one there?
You might say I'm drawing a blank on the third one.
Ah, there it is. See, there it is. So, yeah, by those very subtle references, as you can tell, we are indeed going to be covering a very iconic trilogy that is near and dear to our hearts.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
I'm quite curious, what was your first exposure? So, sorry, before I go on, I better introduce the films themselves, because I'm like, oh, what's the mystery? What's it going to be? Yeah.
Let the audience guess, I like it.
Yeah, it's like at the end, it's going to be revealed to be like a Citizen Kane retrospective. Cornetto. So yeah, today we are going to be talking about, I don't know if this is the official term, because I know like unofficially they've got cornettos in them, representing like the different genres, but it's dubbed as the Cornetto Trilogy, which is composed of 3 films, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and last, I was going to say but not least, but we'll get there, The World's End. They're basically parodies, aren't they, of their respective genres?
Yeah, they're all genre parodies, as you say.
Mm-hmm. So we've got Shaun of the Dead, which is probably the most obvious out of the 3, of course being a parody of horror films and basically zombie films, you know, Dawn of the Dead, Shaun of the Dead. We've got Hot Fuzz as well, which is a kind of parody of action films, and then we've got The World's End, which I have to admit, like, personally I can't really tell, but I don't know if you could, that it is a sci-fi one. I mean, they were kind of building up to that, mind you, but I mean, by the title alone, if you heard World's End, would you assume that it was like a sci-fi epic?
You'd think more like a disaster film, wouldn't you? You'd maybe say something like that rather than a sci-fi kind of one.
It's an interesting name. At least it's better than... So I'll briefly touch on this because I feel as if we have to address the elephant in the room, or as I, described it to you earlier, the stoner comedy in the room. That, of course, being Paul. I think it was about 2011. 2011. Everybody had been waiting for the third installment of this trilogy. So we had Shaun of the Dead, which came out to very positive praise. Then we had Hot Fuzz, which was, honestly, I looked up the reviews and I thought Hot Fuzz was going to be considered to be like better, but I think Shaun of the Dead, rating wise, is actually considered to be the highest in the trilogy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, not by much. I think it's by like a couple of percent, but it's like Shaun of the Dead, then it's Hot Fuzz behind, and then I think World's End is just underneath. I can't believe like the age gap for these films. So Shaun of the Dead came out in 2004, which, my god.
I can't believe that, to be honest. That was a shock when you reminded me.
Yeah, I mean, I was still in school at the time, which kind of showing my age there, but is absolute. In fact, we were both in school, of course.
We were young whippersnappers at that point.
Yeah, we were young. We didn't know what the world would hold for us, and then Birdemic came out, and that just ruined everything. But anyway, Birdemic aside, 2004 was when Shaun of the Dead came out. Was this film popular in your school? Like, were there a lot of kids going around quoting the film, or
it was. That's where I first heard about this, was at school, because I remember a lot of people in my class quoting one particular line, the good old "fuck a doodle doo." That was one that was very popular in 2004 in my class. Yeah,
I can't remember when I saw this, but I think it was like years later, and I just remember that line like being said in the film. So do you remember MSN Messenger?
Oh, who could forget?
And do you remember how you had like a status underneath where you could put like a message or a quote or something like that? Do you ever remember that?
Yeah, I think I remember.
Yeah, it was kind of like the subject line, let's just say, of MSN. And I remember, like, as a joke, I put "fuck a doodle do" there. Like, thinking, ha ha ha, swear word funny. And I remember one time, I don't know why, but like I was checking my emails or something, and I think my dad was like over my shoulder, and I remember him looking, and he was like, "What's that?" And I was like, yeah, that was the sounds I made. I couldn't like, I couldn't string together a coherent excuse. I was just like, get it deleted, get it deleted, get it deleted. That's out of a film, I swear. Yes, Shaun of the Dead corrupted my youthful mind. Yeah. Tell the press. Yeah, I mean, I remember people in my school kind of talking about it, but I think the one that made the most impact was Hot Fuzz by a long shot.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with you on that one. Because I was in high school at the time Hot Fuzz came out, but yeah, like I think it's more because we were of that age that like we could legally see Hot Fuzz.
Yeah.
Like in the way that we couldn't legally see. I couldn't legally see Shaun of the Dead because it was like a 15, I think, and I was under 15 at the time it came out. But because I was able to see Hot Fuzz in cinema, and a lot of my peer group were able to. Yeah, I would agree. It probably did make more of an impact.
And I mean, by the time The World's End came out, that was 2013. So Shaun of the Dead, fantastic, reception. Hot Fuzz, even better. Everyone was expecting the third film, and then Paul came out, and it was just like everybody thought, it was going to be the third film in the trilogy, and turns out it wasn't. It was just I suppose a coincidence, or just that they were doing this. Yeah, in 2011 they were going to do this sci-fi film, and you're like, oh great. I did not care for Paul. I've only seen bits of it, and as I said, it just comes across as more of a stoner comedy than something good.
I'd go as far as to say that I actively hate Paul.
I can agree with that standpoint, and I apologise for anybody who is like pro Paul.
Other opinions are available, but you're wrong. Calling you all out.
Yeah, which then brings us on to The World's End. In The World's End, I don't remember there being much of a buzz about it. I remember people like hyping it up, saying, oh, it's going to be the third one, it's going to be like a sci-fi thriller, and see, after it came out, I don't remember anybody like quoting it or it. Like, I was in university at the time.
Yeah, same for me.
But I never heard like anybody really quoting it or, like saying much about it. And I mean, I went to the cinema with, well, I'll put it this way, I went to the cinema with someone who absolutely hates sci-fi. So that kind of sullied my experience of the film. Imagine coming out with someone who really hates sci-fi and then ranting about it for about 20 to 30 minutes in a car. That's
the cinema experience you want.
Oh yeah, it was fantastic, and we will get on to like our kind of in-depth thoughts about it, but it is safe to assume that your favourite of this series is Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, far and away that is. It's one of my favourite films of all time. I think it's a masterpiece. I
have to admit, like, I'm going to get this out of the way quickly before we dive into the main meat of this. Shaun of the Dead, when I first saw it, I really didn't appreciate it. Like, I really didn't like it as much. But like going back and rewatching it, I found it a lot funnier in retrospect. Hot Fuzz has always been a favourite. Yeah, for me, like I'm totally in Team Hot Fuzz here, which will be quite interesting going forward in this episode. But I think we both agree that The World's End, for the most part, I think, what was it we said before, that it's always the bridesmaid, never the bride? Because I don't, you don't really hear many people, like I have heard a couple of people say, oh, my favourite was The World's End, but that's definitely few and far between.
I've never heard anybody say that. I have to admit so.
Like there
are some people out there who are like who do rate it number one. But,
I mean, I did see some comments on videos, but I don't know if they're just Russian bots that have been paid by Edgar Wright to promote The World's End, or blanks, that would have been the funnier joke. So yeah, in this episode we are going to be going through each one by one, just discussing what we liked about each film, and seeing if they still hold up in this lovely year of 2021, also known as the fallout of 2020. Before we begin, we are going to play off just a couple of messages, but even before that, do you want anything from the shop, Adam?
Cornetto.
Welcome to Chatsunami, a variety podcast that talks about topics from gaming and films to streaming and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we discussed Game of the Decade, Deadly Premonition, the romantic thriller Birdemic, and listen to us get all sappy as we discuss our top 5 Christmas films. films.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can find us on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and all good podcast apps. As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
We are Beer and Chill Podcast.
Podcast where we review TV shows, games, movies, and whatever else takes our fancy.
So what are you waiting for? If you're a cool kid like us, you're gonna listen to the Beer and Chill Podcast. You can get it anywhere from Spotify all the way to your grandmother's radio. My name is Jan.
And I'm Craigie C.
And we are
Beer and Chill.
It would be criminal if we didn't start this discussion in order. Because this is your favourite film, Adam, I'm going to let you kick off with Shaun of the Dead.
okay, I simply adore this film. As I said in the intro, it's one of my favourite films of all time, and I genuinely think it might be perfect. I can't think of a single thing I'd want to change on it. And there's like three. I was trying to think, like, why do I love this film so much? And I distilled it down to like three main points. So I'll go through them. Number one is how the film is structured. I just think the structure of this film is so amazing. It's so tight. And I love how everything is linked together and how there's so many things like on repeat viewings you can watch and you're like, oh, that's like pointing to that. And, you know, that comes back there and everything, just in the lines people say, in the way actions play out, events and everything. And it's really, it feels like out of the three of them, the most kind of Edgar Wright-esque. So for those who don't know, the director of these three films was Edgar Wright, who's also done Baby Driver. Is it called Baby Driver, I think?
Yeah, I was actually surprised he directed that. Because I was looking up a list of films, I was like, oh my god, he directed that? Damn.
Yeah, no, he was also originally down to do the Ant-Man film. I think he wrote most of it. He didn't actually end up like directing it in the end, but he was attached to that for a while. And he's also quite famous in the UK for doing a TV show called Spaced, which was like in the early 2000s. It was before Shaun of the Dead, and also starred Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. And sort of a way that I think that's how the three of them kind of like came to work together. And this Shaun of the Dead has so much of that Edgar Wright styling, just in the way there's lots of fast cuts and kind of like just lots of those kind of stylings that he has, and he carried that on in Shaun of the Dead. And I just think the film holds together so well. And I remember when I fell in love with this film, I would watch this like repeatedly, and I never get bored of it. I could watch this film like, I think I'd watch this on a 24-hour loop, and I don't think I'd get bored because it's just such a fast-paced film and it's so funny. And that brings me on to my second point, that the humor in this film I think every single line hits. Like, it's just so good, and like all the characters, like they all have their quirks and the humor will combine. So you've got like Shaun, who's that kind of slacker, like kind of drifting through life, and then you've got his best friend Ed, who's the kind of stoner, like layabout, and his just like line just doesn't care about anything. His uptight flatmate, like Shaun's girlfriend, who's like trying to like kind of move their life along, and then her like kind of wacky flatmates, and then Shaun's mum. Just all these unique characters all bring these like different elements of humor together, and the lines are just so good. Like, we just talked about fuck-a-doodle-doo as one. I'm not going to list through, because if I start listing all these things, we'll be here for an hour. I think the real reason that I love this film is just its heart, and I think it has actually like a real like emotional like resonance to its core, and it's something that it resonates with me more and more now. So basically, this film is about a man who's basically in a midlife crisis, and zombie movies are at their best when the zombies are used like as an allegory for something. So in like the first George A. Romero zombie film, who's a famous horror director who kind of kickstarted the kind of zombie film trend, and his first one called Night of the Living Dead, the zombies it's an allegory for racism, basically, and it's a discussion of race. The famous one, Dawn of the Dead, which takes place in the shopping mall, is basically a critique of capitalism. And there was a Cuban zombie film from a few years back, whose name I can't remember, but the zombies were used to kind of critique the state of like Cuban healthcare at the time. And so like, for me, zombies are the best when they are used as this kind of social message thing. And this film is about a man going through a midlife crisis, and the zombies basically represent, you know, the problems that are like besetting him, and the fact that he's stuck in his ways, like, and he can't move on, and his girlfriend is like prodding him to be like, when are we gonna when's our life going to start? But he just can't. He almost wants to, but he can't. He just can't like push himself forward. And for me, like I said, this just resonates so strongly with me now because I'm 29 years old, which is the same age that the character of Shaun is in this film.
Yeah, I was surprised at that, by the way. Sorry to interject, but as soon as I heard that, or heard him say that to the young boy that he's working with, he says, "Hey, I'm only 29," and I was like, "Oh, Jesus Christ."
I'm also been in. So Sean's been in a relationship for 3 years with his girlfriend. I've also been in a long-term relationship for 3 years, and like I feel like I'm at that point as well, where like I feel I'm entering a new stage in my life. But I'm like, it's scary and everything, and you're like looking back, and you're like, oh god, am I ready to move on? Everything. So it's just a film that resonates so strongly with me, and it's really a film about a guy, like a person, just trying to move on in their life, but not like lose who they are. And in the way, that's what he's able to do by the end of the film. And I find it a kind of really uplifting. For as much like death and destruction as there is in the film, and like humor and like humor both light and dark, I just find it an uplifting film about like overcoming like your worries and your fears and your demons to just be like just to have a full and happy life. And I did, for me, like I said, that's what really draws me to this film, is just that I just relate. So I find Shaun the most relatable character of like the three main protagonists of these three films. He's the one I identify the most with, and so that just becomes that's just become stronger and stronger like the older I get, to the age I'm at now, just watching it. And so it just draws me to the film, and I just think it's a masterpiece, just at every level. There's nothing I can really critique about this film. I just think it's the tops.
Well, let me tell you why I think it's the worst of the No, I'm only kidding. No. We're saving that line for later. But no, I totally agree with you. I feel as if, as I said in the intro, I really didn't like Shaun of the Dead the first time I saw it. I like certain bits, like obviously all the Simon Pegg stuff, but at the same time, it's because at the time I wasn't really a horror fan. I still wouldn't consider myself like a fan of horror films, but to be honest, Shaun of the Dead isn't really much of a horror film, is it? Even as a parody, except for like a handful of scenes, like people getting their guts ripped out of them. That was a bit brutal, but like other than that, it's quite tame in comparison to some films nowadays where there's blood and there's blood, guts and ice cream everywhere, But I have to admit, like going back to it when you're older and seeing these problems that are a little bit more, as you said, they're a bit more relatable.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you, because it's something I never really thought about when I first saw the film, and then I always remember like going back and watching it, and someone had brought up the point of, or rather the like character development. There's like almost an opposite thing going on between Shaun and his Liz, that's it, his girlfriend. Liz at the beginning starts off as this like woman who is, she wants to see the world, she wants to do this and that, carp diem and everything. Yeah, it is interesting, the character development of Liz kind of going in parallel to Shaun, and I did think that was really cool. I did like that, that she's not that she's accepting not to do anything, but she's kind of realising that sometimes you can just take life quite slow. And it's, as you said, it's like Shaun's trying to find himself and trying to find that kind of purpose.
Yeah.
And again, we could honestly deep dive, which I think in the future we probably should, because these films, like, we could like talk for ages on these. But overall, yeah, I do agree. It's definitely a strong start to the series, and I do think it's definitely a film that you have to kind of go back on and rewatch, maybe like once or twice. I wouldn't say like right away, but definitely for me. And did you feel the same way as well when you first saw this film?
Yeah, no, I also didn't like it when I first saw it, because I first saw it just, I think, the year after it came out. So I just don't think, again, I wasn't really a horror, well, I don't know, because I'm not really a horror movie fan either now. It's not that attracts me to Shaun of the Dead. It's both the humor and like the kind of emotional core to it. But yeah, I also didn't really get it, and it was going back watching it kind of years later in my like kind of later teens that I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I don't
exactly want to end this section on a negative note, but was there anything that you didn't like about this film?
Honestly, there's nothing. Yeah. I honestly think this is a perfect film. I was trying to think if there's anything no.
No.
No, I love it all. I wouldn't change a single thing about this film. It's the perfect length. Like the characters, they don't need anything else. The characters, I think they're all perfect. The humor is great. The scenes hold up. Do you know what the thing I find about this film is so funny? You tell it because you were saying it came out in 2004. This doesn't feel like an old film to me.
Yeah, no, I
This
totally.
feels like a film that could have been released like a year ago. Honestly, like I feel it's one of these almost like timeless. I don't know, like 50 years down the line if it'll feel dated, but to me, this doesn't feel dated in the slightest.
I mean, technically, maybe the phones they're using, but even then,
Yeah,
that's
so they're
like.
smoking inside, smoking in pubs as well is maybe the one thing that dates it as well. But yeah.
But even then, I'm just trying to think as well. I don't think there's really much you can criticize. I mean, there'll probably be like one or two definite things where it's like, oh, they could have used this shade of red for the blood, or they could have done this. But in all seriousness, it is definitely a film I think kind of matures, like a fine zombie wine,
Oh, definitely.
It's definitely the one that you would start people off with, and funny you should say that because I was actually watching this film when I was rewatching these for this episode. I was rewatching with someone who actually hasn't seen these films at all. She turned around to me and she said, "Oh, are these old films?" And I was like, "No, they're like maybe a push like 2006, but I'm sure they're later on." And then I looked up the date and it said 2004, and I was like, "Oh, yeah." Okay, maybe it is a little bit old, but I do agree. It holds up spectacularly. It really does. Speaking of films that do hold up, will we move on to the next one?
I know you're itching to go, so let's do it.
Oh, right, okay. So this is going to be another like speed run of this plot, but my God, I probably feel about this film the same way you do about Shaun of the Dead, because this film, I can't remember when I saw it, but I think I saw it probably towards the end of high school. So this film came out in about 2007, and it follows the character of Nicholas Angel, or Angle as the papers call him, who is a police officer in London, and he's like very multi-talented in, martial arts and everything, and like keeping the streets safe, and he does such a good job that the police send him away to this very quaint, sleepy country town called Stanford. And while he's there, it's meant to be like a very boring post. There's not much going on. He spends his days dealing with people who hate him because he's from the city, and those that don't hate him are quite eccentric, and then eventually it spirals and he realises that this sleepy town isn't all it's cracked up to be, and there's like a darker side to it. It's definitely something that I don't think you can kind of tell going into this film, that it's going to be quite gory, because, I mean, it's not overly gory, but I mean, a man does get his head like crushed by a church roof. Yeah, maybe. And the guy gets gutted. So yeah, it is a little bit gory. But that's not something you expect. See, going into this, you think, oh, it's going to be a parody of action films, and some of the violence is so over the top. But I think that goes kind of part and parcel with the genre of action films. Yeah, I just love this film. I think it is, the humour, much like Shaun of the Dead, the humour just hits every single time. The writing is so like tightly knit. I think this is the longest film that they worked on in the trilogy. Well, sorry, technically second. I think they worked on this for 18 months, because I think technically World's End was an idea that Edgar Wright, I don't know if Simon Pegg as well, but I think it was Edgar Wright mainly had the idea at 21. But for Hot Fuzz, they worked really extensively on the writing, and my God, it just shows. It really shows. I love it. Like, honestly, if it was a person, I would ask it to marry me, and it would be far out my league. I feel as if probably the most apt like description of this film is like the Chekhov's gun of films. But it's basically, if you put an item out on the wall, like for example Chekhov's gun, you're gonna expect it to be used by the end. And it feels as if everything in this film is like a Chekhov's gun, because they set up everything. Some lines where it's like, oh, you just think it's a throwaway line, but they just tie it back so perfectly. Like, there's a scene at the beginning, they're talking about gun control or something, and Simon Pegg's character basically says, who owns guns around here? And one of the police officers flippantly says, farmers. And he asks again, he says, and who else? And he says, farmers' mums. And then later on you get a scene where he like hits a farmer who's like calling out for his mum, and the mum has a shotgun. And it's like really kind of small scenes like that just, oh, they just hit so well. And again, although he's a bit more competent, Nick Frost plays the kind of bumbling police officer as well, who's like his sidekick and kind of teaches him to loosen up a bit. Because the whole point of this film is that Simon Pegg's character is married to his job, and he keeps, he will not shut off, and it's caused him to alienate himself from his loved ones. He's split up with his girlfriend, gets sent away, and his colleagues can't wait to get rid of him, and then eventually finds this friendship in Nick Frost's character. It's just so well done. Like, I honestly, like, I'm in the same boat. Like, I could go on and praise this film for probably a good hour, but yeah, genuinely. So let's do it. No, I'm joking. But yeah, when I first saw this film, I was blown away at how funny it was, how utterly fantastic the humour was, the characters as well are so memorable. I mean, Timothy Dalton in this film he is like the red herring of the film. I'm not going to spoil the ending too much, but yeah, because it's for the greater good. But yeah, the ending is fantastic. The twist and, who's causing the murders and things. One of the best I've ever seen. That's all I'm going to say, but by far one of the best movie twists I've ever seen, and the action's great and everything. I will say it kinda gets a bit balls to the wall crazy towards the end, but you know what, see, other than that, I would say this is a solid film. This is a film I could definitely go back and rewatch over and over again and just not get tired by the comedy, by the action. It is just great. It's absolutely fantastic. Would you say this is your second favourite then, if it's not your favourite?
I'm gonna I'll save my ranking until the end of the episode.
Okay.
We've gone through all three. I totally agree with basically most of what you said there. Like I think there's a strong argument to make. This is the funniest of the three. The humor is so sharp in this one, and the jokes hit so well. Like I think you can well argue this is the funniest. And I totally agree as well. I think it's a really well crafted mystery because it does keep you guessing, right until the end, until you find it. And I think it is such a great payoff, as you say, such a good twist. And yeah, Timothy Dalton, definitely my favorite character out of any of these three films. Timothy Dalton, Simon Skinner is just, he's on top form, and he shows why he's one of the greatest actors ever. I love Timothy Dalton. Again, I feel like if I'm gonna have to throw a criticism, this is, can I just say, any criticisms I'm gonna throw against any of these three films are pure nitpicks, because for me there's nothing majorly wrong with any of these three films, especially Hot Fuzz. There's nothing I can point at and be like, oh, that's a big fault with that one. If I'm going to pick a small fault, this is a subjective thing, so this might not even really be a fault. It's just for me. I find Nicholas Angel the least relatable of the three protagonists.
Oh no, definitely. I'd agree with that.
It's not. I'm not that personality type, but I can totally see if you are somebody of that, personality type who's really wedded to their job and everything, and can relate to a lot of those struggles. Then I can totally see how he is a really relatable character. It's just that's not who I am. I don't have that. I don't have that amazing work ethic and everything. I can't relate as strongly to him, and I don't have that same emotional attachment to it that I do to something like Shaun of the Dead. So that's really the only thing I can throw at it. But even then, that's a subjective thing. That's not really a general criticism of it, because this film is amazing as well. It's so good. It's so funny. It's so watchable. It's a blast.
No, I totally agree with that, because I was thinking back to what you were saying about Shaun of the Dead there, when you were saying about how Shaun is this no, he's not middle-aged because we are the same age. We're not going into that rabbit hole here. He is a young man. An averagely aged man who is going through, as you said, this kind of life crisis, and he's set in his ways and everything, and apparently this is semi-based on truth, where I think Nick Frost and Simon Pegg went to the pub a lot, but Edgar Wright actually didn't want to go, so the stuff with the Winchester is loosely based on that, apparently, which I thought was pretty funny. I have to admit, I thought, okay, that's quite clever. He's definitely the most relatable, I would say, out of the three of them. I think in terms of, if you take it as an action parody, he's a good parody of, the old action film stars you get, that they're trained in kung fu and all of these martial arts, and the deductive skills are like Sherlock. It's he's maxed out all his stats. That's what I'm saying. But I totally agree. As a character, I don't think many of the characters in Hot Fuzz are that relatable. There are a couple of instances, but I do agree. I just wanted to say, yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there. I feel as if it is definitely one that, I think it definitely works, but I do agree with that.
It doesn't detract from it, though. The thing that you said doesn't detract from the film at all. Like, you know, it's still an amazing film, and it's still a masterpiece in its own right as well, so...
And I mean, as I said, the attention to detail, I think that this is, I'm going to bring it up now, but I think this is something that they carry through all three of the films. Just this attention to detail of having like a callback.
Yeah.
Like, they'll set up something earlier. You know, like, I think the most iconic in Shaun of the Dead is when he's walking through the neighbourhood. And, you know, it's the kid playing with the football, and it's the guy washing his car. And then they cut back to that scene later, and it's, like, the same, but... Well, not the same, but the streets are deserted, but then those characters come back as zombies.
There's also, like, the, you know, when Ed's playing, like... I think, actually, Ed's playing Time Splitters too.
Oh, yeah.
When he's playing that, he's like, oh, top left, reload, you know, nice shot.
Yeah.
That gets called back to when they have the gun and they're trying to defend themselves in the Winchester. There's that exact same thing. So there's a lot of those, and I think Shaun of the Dead has the most of those probably, but all of the films have that, as you say.
Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, even in Hot Fuzz, as I said, there's the farmer's mother comment. There's a scene, like, earlier on where they're doing, like, this, like, deduction, where they're like, what about that guy? Why does he have a long coat in this weather? And he's like, oh, maybe he's cold. What about them? Why are they walking like that? You know, really, like, throwaway comments and things. And then, all of a sudden, they come back later on, and you're like, that's why. I think the most famous one is definitely the swan, which surprisingly comes in very handy at the end of the film. Which you think, again, it's like this running joke of, oh, they have to catch a swan and they can't catch it, and eventually, yeah, I won't spoil it, but I would say by far this is my favourite of them. And maybe that says a lot more for me, but again, I think Shaun of the Dead is a fantastic film as well. I think it's very close. Apparently, though, the police were very happy about the portrayal in this film. Yeah, like, they were just happy that there was, like, a kind of positive film that... Or not a positive, but, like, a kind of funny film.
Yeah.
There was, like... Because they went and interviewed, like, a lot of police officers. Or, sorry, Simon Pegg went and interviewed a lot of police officers to, yeah, just, like, get, not experience, but just kind of learn what it was like and everything. And it does kind of show. Like, it doesn't feel as if he's, you know, one of these American cop dramas where it's like, oh my god, we got a 1082 on a 5 AP, and you're like, well, that's just numbers and letters, and that's just gibberish. But you do feel as if he's read up on it and everything. And I will say, there is only one scene, and I wonder if you can help me with this, by the way. There's one scene towards the end when they're having the shootout, and the school kids run into the shop. What happens to that person in the shop?
She doesn't die.
Yeah.
Here at the end. Yeah, that's also something that I've thought about a lot.
Yeah, no, sorry, it's just to quickly explain, but it's like there's a scene where there's a shootout and someone's like in this like this shop, but they're in the top window and they're like trying to snipe Simon Pegg as he's hiding behind this fountain. And Simon Pegg does this thing where he like whistles at these like youths that are standing there, and they all run into the shop, and there's like a sign on the door that says one child, like one child at a time or something, and they all run in at the same time, and then it like snaps to her and she like kind of screams as she like gets pulled away from the window. And I'm like, was it the kids that pulled her away from the window? Was it the fact there was more than one child in the shop? What?
Like, no one must go down.
Like, it's literally the only scene I still think about and go, what was up with that? And considering how this film ends with a bombastic finale, I just don't get it. But that's the only like kind of nitpicky thing I would say. But otherwise, yeah, I love it. 10 out of 10, I would buy a Japanese peace lily anytime. That's what I'm getting you for your birthday next year.
Playtime's over.
And yeah, that brings us on to the third film, of course, being The World's End. Do you want to take the lead on this one?
Okay, I'll try and. So this was the last of the trilogy, and so The World's End centers on this character called Gary King, played by Simon Pegg, who's basically a man who is trapped, who kind of reached his peak at the end of high school, where he was like one of the most popular kids, and like the world was like his oyster, and like he was having like time of his life and carefree and everything, and he had this like tight group of friends, and he's never been able to move past that. And so basically the film centers on him like gathering together his old friends and taking them back to the town that they grew up in to complete this pub crawl, which is known as the Golden Mile, which they attempted at the end of high school but never finished. And like for Gary, it's like the greatest night of his life, and he wants to like kind of bring that time of his life back again. He wants to like relive it basically, but like his friends have all moved on and grown up, and they're very, very reluctant. So he's having to like drag them around, and it's all kind of falling apart. However, a good few stops into the pub crawl, the guys uncover that there's like the town has been like occupied by these, I was gonna say robot. There's a whole thing that they're not actually robots, but I'm gonna call them robots for now, that they name blanks. And they find the town's basically been occupied by these robots who are like basically trying to like in a way colonize Earth and basically kind of bring it in line with the rest of the galaxy. And basically they end up like trapped in this like they're trying to both complete this pub crawl but also survive these like waves of robots. It's a funny one, this one, because I remember I think I didn't watch this in the cinema. I think I got this on DVD when it came out, and like I remember really liking it when I saw it, but it's one that I kind of forgot about, and it's the one that I've seen the least of the three. But watching it again, I watched it again last of the day of this recording, the day before I watched it, and honestly I really, really liked it. I actually surprised. I was like, this is really, really good. I really enjoyed it. How did you feel watching it again?
I felt a bit mixed, I have to say. Like, as I said before, I watched this with someone who absolutely hates sci-fi. And I know, like, a lot of people listening to this will be like, well, why did you take them? I don't know. It was their choice, not mine, surprisingly. But, like, I remember coming out of it and not being impressed. And I don't know if that's because now I feel like, like, I'm so attached to Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz that this one really is not an unpopular opinion that this is the least favourite of like the three for people. Some bits, see, this is the thing, like on the one hand I definitely didn't enjoy this as much as the other two, but what I will say is, like, looking back on it, the attention to detail is absolutely fantastic in this one. Not to spoil it, but there are like a lot of foreshadowing. Like the whole intro is a bit of a foreshadow for what's about to happen. Also, things like the names of the pubs kind of foreshadow what's going to happen, which I thought was kind of a nice, like, touch of detail. So it's definitely not a mindless film. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say, like, it's a, switch your brain off. Although there are some bits, but I'll get to that. But I think overall, I think this is what hurts me the most. It's got a lot of fantastic ideas. I do think the character that Simon Pegg plays in this one, Gary King, is really fascinating character, because I used to know someone quite similar to this in college, and he was similar in the sense that he wore exactly the same kind of clothes, and he would like drink in the middle of the day, and he kept saying how college was his last chance to make anything of himself, but he would still go to the pub and drink. It was like a whole like cycle and things. So it was quite surprising, but I feel as if the characters, again, like Shaun of the Dead, they're very relatable. You're gonna see like an Oman or a Pete. It is good in that sense, but I feel as if with Shaun of the Dead, it's basically like a midlife crisis with zombies. The genre that they're parodying is almost in the background for the most part for these films. It's like Shaun of the Dead, but then the horror element slowly creeps into Shaun's life. And that's what Hot Fuzz and The World's End do as well. But I feel as if once the sci-fi element does creep into The World's End, that's when it kind of does a nosedive, personally. Like, did you feel as if there was any point that this film changed?
I totally see what you're saying, and I totally agree. I think the two concepts sit kind of uneasily. In Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, they blend together seamlessly, and they work. I totally agree that they don't sit together as well in this film. And like, I totally agree with you. Gary King to me is a fascinating character, because for basically, I'd say, I was gonna say 3/4, probably more than 3/4 of that film, he is like such an unlikable dick. Like, he's really a horrible person, and you're like, there's nothing seems to be redeemable about him. And one thing I actually like about this is that like Simon Pegg and Nick Frost kind of play an inversion of roles in the way that like in the two previous films and actually in some of the other works, it's usually Simon Pegg playing the kind of straight man, and Nick Frost plays the kind of wacky, kind of sidekick character. Well, actually, in this film, Simon Pegg's playing Nick Frost is playing a much more straight man role, and it's Simon Pegg who's doing the far more kind of wacky, outrageous character. So Gary King, like Simon Pegg's character, he's just so unlikable for so much of the film. But and I won't say what it is, but there's a moment at the very end of the film where you discover something about his character, and it just, for me, like, everything clicked into place, and I completely understood everything that he'd done, why he was the way he was, like, just every facet of his character. I was like, this all makes sense, and I thought it was actually a real emotional gut punch. I don't know if you felt the same way, but I found it a real emotional gut punch. I was just like, wow, like this, it completely changed everything, and I was like, oh my god, like, I went from despising this character to like just pitying and being like, my god, just feeling so sorry for him. And it reminds me so much of Shaun of the Dead in that way, and that I think both those films, and again, maybe it's just characters I more relate to, because I can understand that feeling of, having a point in your life where you look back and you're like, god, was that the peak of my, was that the peak of my life? Like, is it just downhill from here? Like, that's something I can understand as well. And so I find with those two films, like, I just relate so much to those central characters and all those central themes, and I find they have just such an emotional core, which is what I think really resonated with me watching this film again. Also, I will say, like, there's a pub fight scene in The World's End, which I think might be my favorite scene out of any of these two films. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's the one where Pierce Brosnan, after they have a meeting with Pierce Brosnan, and then there's like a big fight. Just because I remember watching it the first time, and I was absolutely howling at it, because there's this bit where Simon Pegg's character's got this beer and he's desperate to drink it. He's involved. He's just got in this massive brawl, and I just found his acting and everything so funny there, and just for me, I just remember it was uncontrollable laughter. Yeah, the first time I saw it.
Like, going back to what you were saying there about the gut punch moment, I do think this is a good film to go back and rewatch. It's one of those films that when you go back to rewatch it, you do see the reasons that he does these things. The reason he's such an ass to everyone. It is really interesting. Again, it's like that whole, well, maybe not Chekhov's gun in this case, but it's more like the kind of dropping breadcrumbs, of him talking about, being knowledgeable about certain things that you think, why does he know so much about that particular topic? Or why has he got his car from high school? Or maybe not high school, but that kind of time period. Quite well written in that regard, which is why, not that I'm angry at the film, maybe just disappointed. Just that there's so much good going on, and this is the main criticism I'll throw, and this is probably the harshest I'll ever be with this trilogy, but I feel as if, and please don't hate me for saying this, at some moments in this film they do border on stoner humour. Mainly it's the nightclub scene, that bit where it's the very attractive woman dressed in schoolgirl uniforms, which I would say that's gratuitous, but that is something that does happen in a lot of themed clubs here, where they get uni students to dress up in their old school uniform, and drinks are, I don't know, I never went to them, but I'm sure the drinks are slashed. Much like the prices in Hot Fuzz, as I was told by Timothy Dalton. I mean, another moment that really sticks out, and I don't know if you noticed that, was where Andy's confronted by one of these good-looking robots, and the robot says, "Oh, I want you inside me," and then he literally punches through her to be inside. And I don't know, that moment, I was just like, come on, maybe I'm just being too harsh on it because I'm thinking of the humour from Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, and then it just nosedives in that regard. I don't know, do you think I'm being too harsh on it?
If you're being harsh, because I can see where you're coming from, I would just remind you of, and I'm just going to put a little warning here, I'm going to use some very I'm quoting a scene from Shaun of the Dead, but it's
go for it.
Quite graphic, so if you're offended by that, maybe skip ahead 30 seconds. But I would remind you of a scene in Shaun of the Dead where they're in the window after Liz breaks up with Shaun. They're in the pub, and then they're looking at the patrons, and Shaun goes, "Oh, what about her?" And Ed goes, "Oh, coccicidal maniac." Needs to talk about how she started in the first interracial porn film. I mean, maybe that is a much shorter scene than the one in The World's End. But the humour, I would say the humour is it's on the same line there. Like, and I agree, it's not as drawn out as The World's End. So, but I can totally see what you're saying. If it's not your humor, then like, yeah, no, then that's a fair point. If it's just not your humor, then that's fine. Like, I can get it. Like, for me, like, I think I did laugh because I did just because I love Nick Frost's line after it, where he's speaking to Simon Pegg and he's just like, I just punched my wedding ring out for a robot's tummy.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I don't know. Looking at it from a whole, I don't mind it as much, but I see where you're coming from, and I think it's a valid criticism.
Like, I don't want to be too harsh on it and be like, oh, it's the worst thing ever, because it isn't. Like, it is not by far the worst film I've seen. It definitely, for me, is the worst of the trilogy. This is the thing, I don't want to say it's the worst of the trilogy and be like, oh, it's irredeemable, because as I said, there is good elements of this film, but they just really don't mesh with the sci-fi element. And it's weird, because if you look at Shaun of the Dead, everything happens in the background, and then the horror slowly encroaches into his, like, everyday life.
Yeah.
Same with Hot Fuzz, it's like, it's part of his job, and then this world of conspiracies and things come into it, and it's...
Like, the peaceful, like, exterior of the village, like, falls away.
Whereas for World's End, it's like there's this particular scene where the friend group are literally just about to split up, and then the incident happens, like the kind of turning point in the story where the sci-fi element is introduced happens, and then it's like, oh, okay. It's like, it's just... Yeah, it just that happens, and then all of a sudden it's like, great, we've got robots in this film now. But there was no real, and again, like, you would expect like there to be action or something going on with like Hot Fuzz, or you're expecting the zombies to come with Shaun of the Dead. With The World's End, there wasn't really much of a build-up, was there? Unless I could be completely wrong, like, and I've missed it. But...
I think it's something that you see it more when you rewatch it, but I don't think when you watch it the first time round, as you say, it does seem quite abrupt. Like, in a way that it's not quite as well built up as the other two films. It's something that I think once you've seen it once and you know what's coming, you can kind of look and see where it's coming from. But yeah, no, I'd agree.
And I apologise for kind of ending that on a very negative rant, because I don't want to be that guy who's like, The World's End's bad and you should feel bad, because it isn't. Like, as I said, I think Gary King, fantastic character, and I do think the characters in this are really good, but there is just some bits. So before we kind of wrap up, will we talk about the endings of these films? Will we go into kind of spoiler territory for the next couple of minutes? There will be like minor spoilers for, well, no, minor, sorry. The opposite. Pretty major. It is the endings after all. But yeah, we'll go into the spoilers very briefly, so skip ahead a couple of minutes if you don't want to hear, yes, these the climaxes of these amazing films. How would you say the endings do rate in these films?
I like all of the endings. I mean, my favorite is Shaun of the Dead, because, so for the end of Shaun of the Dead, basically the only survivors out of the kind of group, the kind of main group, are Shaun and Liz. So Shaun and his ex-girlfriend at the time, but they get back together again, and they kind of basically, the film kind of ends, it starts like, he said Shaun's like, but he said it's Shaun and Liz living together rather than Shaun and Ed and his flatmate Pete. And I like what you were saying, that like at the start Liz is like saying like, oh, I want to travel, and do all these exciting things, and actually like their life isn't that, and it's actually in a way Liz is saying all these things, but she's not actually wanting like excitement. What she wants is she wants Shaun to commit. That's the real thing she wants. She wants Shaun to commit to their life together, which he just can't seem to do at the beginning, because he can't move past his old life, like kind of represented by Ed, and like he is able to move past, and they're able to have a life together, and that's really what she wants. But at the same time, I like it as well as that Shaun is still able to hold on to parts of his like old life, because Ed has been turned into a zombie at the end, and Shaun is able to like rescue him and like has him living in the shed with like their PlayStation 2, and he's able to go out there and visit him and stuff. So I like that kind of idea that like it is possible to move on in your life, but you don't have to like abandon everything about your old life. You can still have that part of yourself and can still keep like those things that you like and everything. So for me, I find it I think it's really funny, but also really touching ending.
It's a surprising ending, to be sure, but it is definitely it is a really emotional one in the best way. And I have to admit, like, leading on from that, the ending to Hot Fuzz, by far out of the three, although that is like the emotional ending, like the finale to Hot Fuzz, this is the thing, I love the reveal of it. So again, skip a couple of minutes if you don't want to hear, but the villains, or rather the killer, turns out to be killers, and it's the whole village that's involved, and they're trying to make sure that Stanford is the model village of the year every single year, because the main inspector of the town has lost his wife. Basically, she took a mental breakdown because like the day before one of the village competitions came around, there were like travellers who came through, messed up the village, then moved on, and they lost because of it. So he has like this fixation on making this and preserving, and it's this idea again of like this fixation of preserving the thing of the past, and that idea of like trying to get him to move on, which of course he doesn't really. He ends up getting arrested in the he ends up getting attacked by a swan, which is what I was referring to earlier. He gets pegged to what. It is fantastic. See, the reveal of the village as the main antagonist is absolutely fantastic. Like, I don't know about you, but my jaw dropped at that. I was like, I did not see it coming at all. I thought maybe it would be Timothy Dalton, which is a half-truth.
Yeah.
Like, he was set up as a perfect red herring, and I do think it's fantastic. I think it goes on a little bit longer at the end than it should have. Like, there's this whole scene where a sea mine blows up in the station, but everybody survives, I think, except for the doctor who gets pinned underneath it. Just seems a bit weird, and I know that's the point. It's supposed to be like, the old action films, like, I don't know, Bad Boys 2 is one of the ones they bring up, Point Break, that kind of thing. But I think it kind of outstays its welcome there, but that's the only issue, I would say, I have with the ending. The twist itself is great, but then there's another, like, extra, half hour after that, where it's just basically a shootout. It's all really well done, but that's the only thing I would point out. And for the world's end, I'll let you take this one, and I'll jump in while it's beaten on the ground.
The world's end ends with, so there's out of the 5 friends, two of them are basically taken by the robots and killed and replaced. By like robot versions themselves. So like the final 3 characters, you've got Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, and their friend Simon, who's played by Paddy Considine. Considine? I butchered his last name, but yeah. So they survive, and they kind of find like the main, like, the leader. It's not really the leader, but it's like the main hub of this thing called the Network, who are this like alien group who have like infiltrated the Earth and have like basically advanced technology, like mobile phones, the internet, everything, satellites, everything like that, to basically try and like bring Earth into line with the rest of the galaxy, and basically ends up with this like this consciousness like arguing with these like 3 drunkards about everything. Like, they're so belligerent that like they can't just realize it's just like, to hell with this, like, we're gonna leave Earth, it's not worth it, like, you're not worth it, and so they leave, and that basically wipes out technology and basically sends Earth into this like apocalypse state. And basically Nick Frost's character kind of narrates the end, and I do like parts of the end because I think because basically Nick Frost is divorced from his wife. His character divorced from his wife, and like he's been trying to win her back, but they kind of reconcile. He's like, well, our differences don't seem as bad. Yeah, and I kind of like that. And Paddy Considine's character gets together with Rosamund Pike, and her character, who's like who he'd been in love with since he'd been at school and stuff, and that's quite nice. And then the two characters who are robots kind of go back to their old things, and that's kind of funny. And then Simon Pegg's character kind of disappears, and we see him at the end, like he's basically like the artificial consciousness created like robot versions of like Gary's friends when they were young, and he basically takes them, and he's like leading them in a posse and stuff, and they like walk into this pub where it's like saying like no, and they call the robots blanks, and it's like no blanks served here basically. And then he goes in, and we see like he's basically eschewed alcohol now, and he's like teetotal, and he has to drink water and stuff. And then like the film ends with them about to go in this massive fight with all these basically like quote unquote racists in this pub, which is a nice callback, by the way, because you remember when like Nick Frost's character drinking water the first time, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It takes a lot of courage to like walk into a bar with all these like big ugly men in war paint and order water, and that's kind of what happens at the end. Is a nice callback, and basically it kind of shows him like in a way like he's almost found his purpose. So like I do like it because I like the fact that it's kind of is this guy who couldn't move past this point in his life is able to in a way, but again he's able to retain a bit of a vestige, but he's found a new purpose and he's not as self-destructive now. So I do like it. I do like it. What did you think about it?
I did think that was like quite a cool idea. I didn't know what to expect really. I kind of left thinking, that was an ending. I think the idea of like a post-apocalyptic world and everything, that was a cool idea, but like we only got to see like 2 minutes of it, and obviously like we can have half of the film a pub crawl and then the other half like post-apocalyptic. But I mean, if Disney Plus or whatever picked it up, I'm sure it would do well. But no, jokes aside, I think by that point I was just kind of tired out by all the action and everything. I was just like, oh my god. And the emotional reveal that comes out that he's it turns out that he's been self-harming because as he says before, and he keeps reiterating, nothing ever lived up to that night where they did the pub crawl after school. And I have to admit, rewatching it, I do appreciate it because you do see kind of snippets of him trying to retain his old days, like him driving the same car as school, still playing the same songs, him still using like the same catchphrases that they used in school. Like all of these callbacks are fantastically done and they're just weaved in so perfectly. And I do think it's really well done. But the whole alien thing, I don't know. It just seemed like it almost felt like 2 separate films, which is something I never felt with Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz. As was said before, it felt as if they naturally kind of meshed with one another. With this, it almost felt as if they were trying to pour like oil on water, and some bits were going through, but other bits you were just like, overall, it just, for me personally, I like the idea of like the post-apocalyptic bit, and a lot of the characters getting relatively happy endings. Some of them were like the heads were smashed in, so I don't know how that's going to work for them in the future, but I felt it was just like it was bombastic. I will admit, them having the big chase scene, and I have no idea what the big robot was. I'm going to be honest. I felt as if that was a bit too much.
Modern art.
Just the 5G statue running around. I was like, what is this? So yeah, I think personally it's definitely the weakest of the 3 ending wise, but that actually brings me on to my final point, rankings. And I think I could probably tell what you're going to say, but I'm going to give it to you then.
It should be pretty obvious that Shaun of the Dead is number 1 for me. I think it's flawless. I think it's perfect. I absolutely love it. Probably going to hate me, but World's End is my next favourite.
What?
Yeah. And then, now, here's what I'll say. In terms of an actual pure film, Hot Fuzz is a much better, much like tighter, like it's a much better film. World's End is a lot scrappier and everything, and I agree it doesn't hold together as well. Man, it's got an emotional core to it though. And maybe there's a bit of recency bias here. This last one I watched, but I was just really like drawn to it, and the emotion of it just really resonated with me in a way that, and that's the thing about Hot Fuzz, like I love Hot Fuzz, but it just doesn't have that emotional draw for me, and I don't know, that's just something that it's just really important to me. Like sometimes I'm watching films, it's just how much I get kind of emotionally invested in it. Honestly, like it could be like a 2A 2B thing, with World's End, Hot Fuzz, because Hot Fuzz is, and this is no slight against Hot Fuzz, like ranking this, like Hot Fuzz is a fantastic film, and everybody should watch it because it's amazing. And maybe my opinion will change, but I'm sorry, it's gonna be it's number 3 for me.
That is a twist and a half right there.
Doodle too.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah, no surprise for me. It's definitely Hot Fuzz sitting at number 1. I'm going to go with Shaun of the Dead for number 2 in mine. This is the thing, World's End for me is definitely by far my least favourite, and it doesn't mean it's a bad film. I'm going to reiterate kind of what you said because I'm a filthy plagiarist, but I do agree, World's End definitely has that emotional core. I just feel as if like a lot of the sci-fi stuff does it a bit of disservice at times. It's like it's hard to get invested in, Gary King, who is this washed out guy who struggles with, basically as the film suggests, or all 3 of them suggest, is this theme of moving on with life, whether it's Shaun with his relationship, Nicholas with his, job, or of course, Gary with his thinking back to the past and everything. And I just feel as if punching robots does that a disservice. I don't know, maybe I have to rewatch it, because it's only this stage. It's only this stage, like, I'm starting to kind of warm up to it slightly. Because before I absolutely hated it. I thought out of the three, I would watch Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead over and over again, but this is like the second time I've watched it since the cinemas. So I don't know, maybe I just need to rewatch it again. I'm not saying like, you know, like a Clockwork Orange, where I've got my eyes strapped open and I'm rewatching it like, stop it. Yeah, stop it now. But for me, it's definitely the weakest out of the three. And again, if you're listening to this and you're a fan of The World's End, yeah, feel free to let us know. Like, if you're a fan of it, or really just what your favourite one out of the trilogy is. And I honestly think that we probably could, like, do deep dives into these episodes, or these films, rather. We could definitely do it a better service, but they're great films regardless. I would wholeheartedly recommend, and I'm sure you agree as well.
Oh, yeah. No, like, I recommend all of these films. And again, it's that thing of saying, like, what's the worst, quote unquote worst? Like, for me, there's no bad film in this trilogy. It's a really strong trilogy of films. Mm-hmm. That's for me, like, it's having to nitpick. It's having to be like, well, I don't like this kind of little bit. And again, it came down to my decision came down to a subjective thing, which, you know, again, I don't think the things that I've said against Hot Fuzz are actual criticisms of it. It's just how I feel.
Yeah.
So I would recommend any of these films. For me, they're all amazing. And yeah, just go watch them all. And then watch them all again, because they're worth rewatching.
No, I would agree with that, because although you might think, oh, it's just a silly zombie film, silly action film, silly sci-fi, you don't really get an appreciation for them, do you? Unless you rewatch them and think, oh, that's what they were talking about earlier, or oh, that's what they were referring, you know, it's definitely rewatchable, but it's also rewarding to rewatch it and kind of spot these Easter eggs and things. It's great, and we definitely, probably, maybe we'll come back to them, but yeah, we're probably leaning on the side of definitely. Yeah, I honestly, me too. I can see us like revisiting these films and doing like a deep dive. So if you want to see that, please let us know down below. Seeing as it is the end, would you like to conclude the episode?
It would be my honour. So thank you all so much for joining us for the start of this new and exciting season. I feel like we got off to a bang here, and this rocket's just going to keep flying. We're going to keep shooting for the moon. So we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much, Satsunami, for putting this episode together, for inviting me on, and for bearing your soul, bearing your heart about these films.
Oh, it's a pleasure as always.
And so we will see you all next time. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay awesome. Most importantly, stay hydrated, and jog on.
Oh, bye guys.
Bye-bye.